viewers. On this very special Hangeul Day, we are celebrating the beauty of the Korean language and the art of translation that brings it or takes it to the rest of the world. So we have a very special interviewee joining us today. He has a number of famous works, including a book on BTS's 10-year journey, translated and rocketing to #1 of the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list. And, translating Korean to English is not an easy task. And it really does take a true master, I believe, of not just Korean, but obviously of English as well. For today's first interview, well, his works have been nominated for the International Booker Prize. And also, he has a role upcoming as a judge for the 2025 International Booker Prize Awards as well. So that's coming up next year. Let's without further ado, get to know him better. Joining us is Anton Hur, who is an author and translator of Korean literature into English. So let's say hi to him. Hi, thanks for joining us today.
Hello, Busan FM. It's lovely to be here.
Yes. So first of all, I'm so curious. I was doing a little bit of reading about you, and I want to know first, what inspired you first, even before becoming a translator, to become a writer and then also a translator of Korean literature? Can you tell us about your journey?
I was inspired to become a writer since I was like a child, single digit age, and I no longer remember what inspired me to become a writer. And because I was interested in literature, because I was interested in reading in books from a very young age, I feel like it just became very natural for me to be interested in writing. And then this got me interested in language. Insofar as I am interested in language, I'm not really. My father is a language person. I'm more of a literature person. And I became a professional translator first because, as A.S. Bayat says, fiction is a middle-aged art. You need to be old in order to write fiction, really. I mean, obviously there are exceptions. And so I thought, well, I'm already a translator. Why don't I do literary translation, because I love literature so much? And here we are.
Indeed. And so obviously today is a special day. We're celebrating the beauty of the Korean language itself. So in your opinion, because you just said you love literature, what makes Korean language, Korean literature so unique in comparison to, for example, first of all, other languages?
So you just conflated literature and language a bit. And again, I make the distinction between literature and language. Okay. I don't really think that the Korean language is really that unique. I mean, obviously there are many features that make it unique, and it is called, linguists do call it an orphan language, along with a kind of like a orphan sibling language with Japanese, because it's so unlike any other language grammatically, and syntactically, in terms of all of that linguistic stuff that I'm completely not interested in. And I also abhor any kind of nationalism where we're like, oh, Korean is just especially more beautiful than other languages. It is not. I'm sorry, but it is. All languages are beautiful. All literatures are beautiful. There's nothing that makes Korean uniquely beautiful. And it is my fundamental belief that nationalism is like the lowest form of intelligence. And anyone who is a nationalist basically has nothing else, and that's why they're a nationalist. So I'm perhaps not the best person to answer this question. I think Korean literature is really great and terrific because we have really fantastic writers. And in recent years now, we have fantastic translators as well, which is something that we have not had. Translators who can, operate at a certain level, who can not only translate at a publishable level, but who can also pitch books, discover books, uncover books, promote books. People who can do all of the things that literary translators working at the best levels in all languages can do. Like, that is a recent development. And that, I feel, explains like the success of Korean literature in recent years.
Ah, and so when you talk about translating Korean literature, because you mentioned right now that you think that there are fantastic writers of Korean literature, then what's to you the most important factor when it comes to translating that Korean literature from Korean into English?
Well, it's like an actor who is acting a role. They have to find a midpoint between the translator's voice and the actor's and the voice of the role. I guess the translator's voice and the writer's voice, the narrator's voice. So it's everyone thinks that the translator should erase themselves. They should be invisible. The book should sound as if it was originally written in English. All of these things are completely meaningless and not helpful and weird. The most important thing for a translator to do is to put a little bit of themselves into their translation so that it has that voice of authenticity, so that it's interesting for you too, as a translator, to work on this work. You are not some mindless AI parrot trying to bamboozle the reader into thinking that, no effort went into the work of moving this literary work from one language to another. It really has to be a work of art in itself. We don't look at actors and think, oh, what they're doing is not art. We don't look at piano, someone like, playing the piano, playing Mozart on the piano and think, oh, that person who is playing the piano is not Mozart, so therefore they're not an artist. Like, we don't think that of piano.
Sure.
We don't think that of actors. Why do we think that of translators? But for some reason, we always think that of translators.
Oh, that's a great point, though. Thanks for pointing that out to our listeners. In terms of your translations, obviously garnering international recognition, and for that, I mean, maybe not to you personally, but isn't it important for translated works, as you say, to get recognition, not just maybe not the fancy accolades all the time, but the fact, as you mentioned, that, a classical musician, not Mozart, not Beethoven, but they get their props, and maybe translators, they don't. But maybe, is this a growing field that hopefully maybe people are recognizing the importance of translators and translations?
Oh, I hope so. Otherwise, none of this growth is sustainable.
Yes.
If we don't recognize translators, if we don't pay translators what translators are worth, if we don't find ways of, for example, funding samples, funding proposals, funding the work that it takes for translators to, market their works to not just reading audiences, but also to publishers, to editors overseas, all of that takes time, effort, and money. And if we don't invest in our translators to do that work, and only translators, maybe some agents, only translators can do that work, then, none of this growth is sustainable. And all of this so-called soft power that the Korean government is supposedly obsessed with, but refuses to fund properly.
Right.
And none of that is going to last. And we're just going to, what's going to happen to Korean literature? We are not as successful as K-drama. We are not as successful as K-pop. Like, people always conflate the success of K-pop and K-drama with success of K-literature. We are not like them. We do not have their funding. We do not have their draw. We do not have their audience. So people are kind of like, oh, but we don't really need to fund translators or fund translation anymore. Or I've heard all of those arguments. They're all BS.
Anton, actually, our listeners, they've been sending in messages because they have so many questions. But of them, I chose one. So a person named 토리님, they want to know, so in Korean, they write 번역하면서 가장 옮기기 어려운 단어는, so they want to know, there are obviously nuances, differences in different languages. So maybe difficulty in translating a particular word or phrase. Do you have one that comes to mind?
I'm really great at translation, and I don't find any words or particular phrases difficult to translate.
Touche.
Like, do I go to your work and go like, oh, what's the hardest part about your job that you can't do? No, I don't do that. Why do people always ask me this question? I don't understand. Like, first of all, I don't translate words. I don't translate phrases. I translate vibe. I translate atmosphere. I translate mood. I translate perspective. These are the things that I translate. Like
I see.
if my job was involved with translating words, then an AI would have taken over my job years ago. But it hasn't because an AI can't do what I do, and that is translate all of those things.
Yes. I fully respect that. Well, I do want to, before you, I let you go, I know you're quite busy. You recently published a work titled Toward Eternity, as well as 하지 말라고는 안 했잖아요. I believe it was last year, if I'm not mistaken. Can you tell us more about these works, about your works?
Sure. So 하지 말라고는 안 했잖아요 is a Korean collection of essays on translation. And this was commissioned by a Korean publisher here in Korea called Across Books. When it was commissioned, I thought, who's going to read that? But apparently it's sold out. It's first printing, so people are reading it. And it's also a collection of some of the lectures that I've given on translation overseas, like at Oxford University, at Princeton University. Toward Eternity is my novel. It's published with HarperCollins in the US and also the UK. This is a speculative fiction work that has to do with poetry, cloning, and AI, and how all of those very disparate things kind of connect together. And what does, those repetitious structures have to do with our humanity?
Well, I do want to thank you for coming on air with us and really telling us, as it is, your thoughts on everything. So thanks for taking the time to join us on Hangeul Day. We do appreciate it. Thank you, Anton.
Thank you so much for having me.